Welcome back to lesson number 5 on the book of Isaiah in the fall semester of 2024. Last week we talked about Hezekiah and God's protection of Judah and Jerusalem, and how that the Assyrians would not be able to defeat Jerusalem, that Sennacherib instead, who was the king of Assyria at this time, his soldiers would be defeated outside of the city of Jerusalem. He would then make his way home to where he would end up going to one of his houses of idols to worship one of his idols. 2 of his sons would come in and slay him. They would then flee to Albania, and then his 3rd son would take over the kingdom. And so God gave a great victory here to Hezekiah. Then God promised Hezekiah that he wouldn't die after nearly dying, and then praying out and asking God to give him longer life, and God did give him longer life. And everything was great, but what would happen now is that Hezekiah would fall into the trap that many leaders fall into, and that's the position of pride. He got to thinking more highly of himself than he should have. Started showing off the things that God had blessed him with, and in a sense was taking credit for that, and was visited by some people, the Babylonians, who were not a very powerful kingdom at this point, but nevertheless they would come in, and Hezekiah would show the Babylonians his riches, his house of silver, house of gold, jewels, spices, and fine oils. And so God had to rebuke Hezekiah in 2 Kings 20. Isaiah was sent to rebuke him because of this, because of his pride. And he would suffer because I guess the strange thing about this, that Hezekiah himself suffered rebuke, chastening of God, lost the fellowship with God. But eventually his descendants would suffer, and Judah would suffer because of Hezekiah's pride. Isaiah predicted, and it did happen, that one day Babylonian soldiers would carry off the riches that Hezekiah had made known. And during the Babylonian captivity, that's exactly what happened. I mean, he's the 13th ruler of Judah, and then by the time you got to the 17th ruler, then the Babylonians started taking over, and eventually took Judah completely captive. And it was also predicted not only would they take the riches of Hezekiah, but that his own sons would become their slaves, and that's, of course, exactly what did happen. His sons became the kings of Judah, but they were puppet kings controlled by the Babylonians. And when Zedekiah, the last king, decided that he would rebel against the Babylonians, then they would send in people to get Zedekiah, and then have his eyes, there's actually his sons killed in front of him, and then have his eyes put out because of Judah's continual sin, and then the leadership not doing their job like they should have. But all started with Hezekiah as far as these certain events here would take place. You can see how that sin does affect next generations. My descendants won't pay for my sins, but they will be affected by my sin. And that's what we have to understand, that we don't live, no man liveth unto himself, no man dieth unto himself. What we do does affect other people, and it could be a positive way, or it could be a negative way. In this case, Hezekiah had all the opportunity to have a positive influence, and for a while did have a great positive influence upon Judah, and upon the world for that matter, because he followed his example and how God would bless. But we also see his downfall, his pride, how it got to him, and how that affected all those that are around him. That's why we have to be very careful about our relationship with God, and understand that what I do absolutely affects other people, not just myself. Then we'll back up in Isaiah here a little bit, go back to chapter 14, and look at the downfall of Lucifer. Say 2 main passages in the Bible, and we'll look at those 2 passages in this lesson, in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. and see what led to his downfall and those 1/3 of the angels that fell with him. But we see his position here. His name means the bright shining one. And it actually in Isaiah 14 referred to as the son of the morning. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? So one of the great positions that God gave him, but it led to pride. Now we don't know exactly when the angels fell, how long it was before the world was created, but it was before the world was created. And so all that took place before Adam and Eve, and like I said, before the earth itself was created. But God made angels in the image of himself, just like he made man in the image of himself. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that people and angels look alike, because they don't. They're completely separate beings. All the angels that were created, the same number still exists today. Just like all the souls that will ever be born will always exist, whether in heaven or in the lake of fire, but they will always exist. So they will never be exterminated and wiped out. But whatever, and angels never reproduce like mankind reproduces. Angels never reproduced. So whatever God created in the past is how many exist today. Their positions, whether righteous angels or fallen angels, or however you want to word it, as angels and demons, same meaning there behind that, just different wording. But both titles refer to his position as God's anointed one. And so, with being made in the image of God, the angels had intellect, emotion, and will. Just like mankind has intellect, emotion, and will. Now, the third thing is what makes the difference, whether we choose to serve or don't choose to serve. And angels had that choice. Now, apparently, and we don't have any scripture to back this up, but just from events that take place in the Bible and the things that are mentioned in the Bible, we don't see where angels have a choice after the earth was created, that their position is established. Just like mankind's position is established after the end of the millennial kingdom, after the Great White Throne Judgment, all mankind will all be righteous that serve God in heaven, and all the lost will be in the lake of fire with no decision after that as far as accepting God. No. We don't ever see where angels could get saved, that they could be redeemed. There's nothing in the Bible that states that. So apparently when the angels fell, 1/3 decided to follow after Lucifer, and 2/3 decided to follow after God, not Gabriel or Michael. Gabriel and Michael are not the ones who created the angels, obviously, and Lucifer is not the one that caused the 1/3 of the angels to fall with him. They had a choice. And so we see that apparently took place before the creation of the world. Now, because of his fall, his position has changed. No longer referred to as the bright, shining one, but rather as Satan or the old dragon, the snake. Different names refer to Satan. But he's fallen from heaven. And we see this in his pride in Isaiah 14:13 and 14. It's what we refer to as the 5 I wills of Satan. It said, "For thou said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." So we'll break these down into different categories and try to give an explanation of what these statements mean. But the word, I will, the Greek word ego, E-G-O, we think of ego today as someone who is self-centered. And that's exactly why, because the word ego is the same as the word I. Like, I will. I know this is Hebrew here, but if you were talking about in the New Testament, we would have had the word ego here. But ego is someone who is self-centered. And that can be taken two different ways. That can be someone who is so full of themselves and so arrogant. They also are just totally self-centered. But it also could be someone who is always down on themselves because they're still self-centered. You know, I can't do anything. I can't. I'm nothing. I'm no good. I'm always, poor pitiful me kind of syndrome. That's self-centered, and that's wrong. Just like I'm the greatest, that's wrong. I'm the worst, that's wrong. We have to be what God would make us to be and not be self-centered, but rather center our attention upon God and upon others in mankind. But we'll break this down here, the 5 I wills of Lucifer in Isaiah 14. With the first I will being, I will ascend into heaven. Isaiah 14:13. Satan would possess the third heaven. Now, the word third heaven we get from 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 4. If you read the passage, and we won't read it, but the story there in 2 Corinthians 12 is that Paul is not wanting to be lifted up with pride and not wanting to be self-centered. He starts discussing others. He said, I have nothing to glory in myself, but if I have someone to glory in, let me tell you, he said, I met a man a while back. And that man, such a one, was called up into the third heaven. Now, Paul wasn't caught up in the third heaven. I don't know why people want to put 2 Corinthians 12 as that Paul had died and went to heaven. And then they try to reference it when Paul was stoned and left for dead. The Bible never says that Paul was stoned to death. He was stoned by the people and then later got up and left the city. He had apparently just passed out, but he did not die. There's nowhere in the Bible that says he died. And plus, that event doesn't match up with Paul's statement in 2 Corinthians 12. Paul talks about it, 14 years ago, so that the dates don't match up to the event of Paul being stoned to death and the event of 2 Corinthians 12. They don't match up in that respect. And plus, if you read the text, and that's what we have to do, is read the text, Paul never said that he died. I even heard someone say, well, Paul only used the illustration of a man because he didn't want to be prideful, but he wanted to tell the story of what happened to him. Well, then that would be a lie. And God would have deceived us with his word. And God doesn't deceive us with his word. So no, Paul didn't die. He met a man who went up to third heaven. And so that's the point of all that is a reference here. When Satan says, I want to send into heaven, he's talking about the third heaven. The first heaven is the air that we breathe. Second heaven is the galaxy, the planets where they're at. And then the third heaven is the place where God resides. And where that's at, we'll find out one day. But that's all we have as far as this statement here is made. Secondly, he says, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Now, I believe this is talking about he desires the worship of the angels. Angels are likened, a name for angels given in the Bible is stars. We see that in Revelation 12:4. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and it cast him to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Of course, this is a reference here to Satan, the dragon. The Bible makes this reference that the dragon is Satan. And so we know that for a fact. And then the third part of the angels fell with him and cast him to the earth. And then the woman to be delivered of the child would be the Messiah as it was born. So Satan's desire was to destroy Jesus, but of course it didn't take place. And so this, I know in book of Revelation at one point it's talked about 1/3 stars fall from heaven during the book of Revelation. This is not the same thing. Right? And the reason we know that, when did this take place? Well, this is when they all came down to devour her child. This is when Satan took out an all spiritual attack upon the world when Jesus was born, trying to stop the Messiah from coming to die for mankind. Later on, the stars, 1/3 stars will fall from heaven in the book of Revelation, and that's when 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the stars, 1/3 of the fresh water, 1/3 of salt water, 1/3 of the plant life, 1/3 of sea life, when all those are destroyed in the tribulation period. Third, I will. He said, I will also sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. And here we see Lucifer seeks God's position. The north. Psalm 75:6 says, promotion cometh now from the east, nor the west, nor from the south. And then, but God is the judge. He put down one and set up another. So God's position, we're not promoted from the east or west or south, so we must be promoted from the north. And who is it that promotes us? Well, God does. So apparently God's position is in the north now. We're at a loss to exactly what all that means, but simply a reference that God gives us. So Satan wants that position. And number 4, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Now this is, the F should not be there. Sorry about that. But from what we gathered, this very likely refers to the Shekinah glory. When God is present, it's in a cloud. Remember Jesus' baptism and Jesus' ascension into heaven. He was caught up into the clouds. The Ark of the Covenant was the cloud that was in the Ark, the Shekinah glory, the presence of God. So some type of a glow that represents the presence of God here. And what we refer to as the Shekinah glory. The Bible doesn't use the word Shekinah glory. That's a word that is made up by the rabbis throughout the centuries, one time or the other, not exactly when it was first began to be used, just to give a unique word to the presence of God. Should not be used in reference to any other thing other than the actual presence of God. And then the 5th, I will. So I will be like the Most High. And it's interesting, the word he used here for the Most High is the word El Elyon. El Elyon, which means the strongest strong one, the all-powerful one. So he said, I will be just like him. I'll be all-powerful. Like God's all-powerful, I'll set him down, and I will become the all-powerful. So the 5 I wills here of Satan that led to his downfall, his pride. So when we become prideful, God has a way of shutting us down. You remember Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. One day God gave him a vision of a great tree, and the tree had fruit in it, and the birds and the animals from all over the world came to eat of the tree. And then the tree was cut down, and a little sprig started growing out, a little branch growing out of the trunk. And Nebuchadnezzar couldn't figure out what was going on here. And so he asked his advisors, nobody could answer it. Finally, Daniel, under the command of God, gave him the understanding of this tree. And he said, Nebuchadnezzar's tree is like your kingdom. Your kingdom is great, the most powerful kingdom in all the world, and all the other nations come to you. But if you don't quit being prideful, God could cut this tree down. And if you repent, then that little sprig, that branch can come up and grow up again. But if you were prideful, I'll cut you down. Well, a little bit later on, Nebuchadnezzar comes out and says, look, the kingdom that I have built with my hands, that I have done. And then he went out for 7 years in the wilderness as a wild man, away from everyone else, until he finally came to his senses and repented, and God brought him back to his kingdom. And then that little sprig or branch grew out of the trunk to become a mighty tree again. And so God has a way of cutting our trees down if we become prideful. And if we repent, God can bring us back up, but don't count on it. I mean, that's what God did for Nebuchadnezzar, but don't count on it for us. Because of pride, people will be put down for the rest of their life. So his covetous here, there's pride. He wants God's place, God's preeminence. Number 1, he wants God's program, that he'll rule the world. And then God's position, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. And God's power. God's power. This is foolishness of Satan. This is what happened before the world began, and God cut him down, created the earth, and now Satan wants to destroy the world, and he wants to stop God's plans. And every single time along the way, he has been limited by power. God did give him a certain amount of power, but he's been limited, and should understand that every prophecy that was ever came in the Old Testament was fulfilled exactly like it was supposed to in the New Testament. He should know that the tribulation period is coming. He should know what's going to happen. He should know he'll be defeated at the end. He should know that he'll be bound for 1,000 years. And then he should know that eventually he'll be thrown into the lake of fire at the end of the millennial kingdom. Guaranteed. But that's not stopping him. He'll still try to do what he thinks he can, but he'll fail, like every other time he's failed. His punishment, Isaiah 14:15 says, "Yet shalt thou be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." And then when he gets there, they that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, "Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that shake kingdoms?" I mean, is this the one? Like, he's nothing. And that's exactly what's going to happen. This misconception about Satan ruling hell, controlling hell, and it just goes far from the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it even hint at Satan being in control of hell. There's nothing in the Bible that says Satan has ever been to hell. I don't believe he has. I don't believe he can go there. In fact, he will not be there till the end of the millennial kingdom. For 1,000 years he'll be bound wherever that God has chosen to bound him at. And then in 1,000 years he'll be cast into the lake of fire where hell and the dead are. And then they'll say, when he gets there, they'll look at him and think, is that all he is? This is the one? He's nothing. And that's exactly what will take place. Ezekiel, I'm not going to read through all of these passages, but 13, 14, 15, and 16, Ezekiel 28, God refers to Satan's habitation. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Ezekiel 28, 14, thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and have set thee so. So he is the anointed cherub, the chief cherub, the leader of the group of angels referred to as the cherub or cherubim. Thou was upon the holy mountain of God. I mean, he was in the presence of God. Thou was perfect or complete in thy ways from the day thou was created, till iniquity was found in thee, until just like Adam and Eve sinned, Satan, before Adam and Eve were made complete in all their ways, and no sin was found in them until they disobeyed God. Same thing true with Satan. By the multitude of my merchandise, thou hast filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned, therefore I'll cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God. So, verse 17, thy heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. There's pride. Corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. Verse 18, thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore I'll bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee. Verse 19, all they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more cast into the lake of fire, never to come back anymore after that. So, what a terrible end result for one of God's beautiful creations. Why? Pride. Sin. The destructiveness of sin. The complete destructiveness of sin in Satan's life and the 1/3 of the angels that fell with him. And what a sad, sad commentary that is. That God gave them every opportunity and they chose to reject. And we'll stop there a little bit early this lesson, but next week we'll start with the judgment of nations, a very common theme throughout the Bible. And God has very much to say about judging nations based upon the Abrahamic covenant. So Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 15, the promise that God would judge those who go against Israel. And so we'll look at that next week.